This is WFYI News Now. It's October 21st, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, new data shows industries in Indiana put out fewer greenhouse gas emissions last year than they did in 2020. An expert says high property taxes have impacted how much public schools get from their local tax base. And two Indiana officials are questioning the citizenship of more than 500,000 registered voters.
The more than 585,000 registered voters Morales and Rokita are questioning fall into three categories.
Those stories are coming up, but first. For decades, Wheeler Mission has taken the lead in Indianapolis's so-called winter contingency plan for people experiencing homelessness. The annual plan outlines shelter overflow options as more people seek shelter during the winter. Wheeler says this year it needs to scale back. In recent years, Wheeler has gone over capacity to shelter people, and it doesn't have the resources or staff to do that again this year. Since the pandemic, local organizations have relied on millions in federal emergency relief funding, and Diversion Team Manager for Health Net's Homeless Initiative program, Melissa Bell, says much of that money has run out, leaving gaps.
When that funding runs out, it's not just flexible dollars that are not available, it's staffing.
Wheeler has 2 shelters and is expecting to be able to shelter nearly every single man and every single woman. They will not have enough space for families. Partners say a top priority will be diverting families from becoming unsheltered initially. There are some funds from the city available to put people in hotels. The full plan for this winter will be finalized by November 1st. Industries in Indiana put out even fewer greenhouse gas emissions last year than they did in 2020. That's according to data from the Environmental Protection Agency. As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports, it's significant because some companies reduced their hours or shut down during the pandemic lockdown.
Industrial emissions are down 7% since last year. Coal plant closures have been driving emissions decreases over the past decade. More than half of Indiana's industrial emissions come from power plants and more than a quarter from steel and aluminum manufacturing. Whether this downward trend will continue through the next decade is unclear. 5 coal plants are expected to shut down in the next 4 years, but many of them will be wholly or partially replaced by natural gas plants, which also emit greenhouse gases. Some utilities, like Duke Energy, have also delayed coal plant retirements to accommodate businesses with high energy demands, like data centers. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
And why do some school districts in Indiana rely on referendums to fill funding gaps? Indiana Public Broadcasting's Kirsten Adair reports on one expert who says high property taxes have impacted how much public schools get from their local tax base.
Property taxes are capped at either 1%, 2%, or 3% in Indiana, depending on the type of land. When property taxes increase more than those percentages, landowners receive tax credits. Longtime Indiana property tax researcher Larry DeBoer says tax caps limit the money that goes to local government units like schools. DeBoer says whether a district faces a significant drop in funding depends on city and county property tax rates. If those rates are high, they push all units of government, including schools, into tax caps.
It very well could be that the schools are, in a sense, victims of the location in which they happen to be operating.
DeBoer says some harder-hit schools ask voters for more tax money through referendums. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Kirsten Adair.
And for our final story today, Indiana Secretary of State Diego Morales and Attorney General Todd Rokita are questioning the citizenship of more than 500,000 registered voters about 3 weeks before Election Day. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports the Republican officials sent a letter to the federal government with voters' names and birth dates, asking it to confirm their citizenship status.
The more than 585,000 registered voters Morales and Rokita are questioning fall into 3 categories: those who registered without providing a driver's license or social security number, registered voters located overseas, and those who registered simply without a driver's license number. Under federal and state law, you can register to vote using a paper form without having a driver's license or social security number, and many voters located overseas are members of the military. If the federal government does potentially flag people as non-citizens, federal law doesn't allow counties to remove them from the voter rolls, and there are questions about whether Morales and Rokita are allowed under state law to share voters' birth dates with federal officials. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you liked today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.